Martina Navratilova reveals the one fix that could transform Alex Eala's career. The warning did not come from a random commentator looking for attention. It came from Martina Navratilova, one of the most accomplished champions tennis has ever known, and the message was brutally simple. Alex Eala already possesses the fight, she already possesses the timing. She already possesses the left-handed disruption that makes opponents uncomfortable. But there is one part of her game that could change everything if she turns it from a weakness into a weapon, the serve. That is the frightening part. Because Alex Eala has already shown that she can trouble some of the biggest names in women's tennis without owning the kind of overwhelming serve that usually gives elite players free points. And when Navratilova watched Eala battle Jasmine Paolini at Wimbledon, she saw exactly where the next leap could come from. She questioned the pace, the grip, the lack of slice, and especially the way Eala was not fully exploiting the natural geometry of being left-handed. Navratilova's conclusion was unmistakable. The serve is the area where Eala has the most room to gain. Think about what that means. This is not a legend saying Alex Eala needs to rebuild her entire game. This is not a verdict that her movement is inadequate. This is not a declaration that her ground strokes cannot survive against the elite. It is almost the opposite. It is the suggestion that the machine is already dangerous, and one missing component could make the entire thing explode. Eala has already demonstrated the ability to absorb pressure, redirect pace, attack from the baseline and make established champions feel as though the court is suddenly smaller. Her left-handed patterns create uncomfortable angles. Her competitive instincts keep her inside matches that appear ready to escape. Her return game can drag opponents immediately into physical rallies. But every time she steps to the line to serve, there is still an opportunity waiting to be unlocked, and Navratilova saw it. During Eala's Wimbledon run, the young Filipina defeated Renata Zarazua, Maya Join, and Iga Swiatek before reaching the fourth round, where Paolini finally stopped her in 3 sets on center court. That run pushed Eala to what was then a career-high ranking of number 28 and confirmed that her breakthrough was no longer some isolated miracle. But the Paolini match exposed something fascinating. Eala could fight. She could create, she could survive, yet she was not consistently beginning service points with the kind of aggression that forces an opponent to retreat before the rally has even started. Navratilova noticed that Paolini was stepping into Eala's second serve. She noticed that even the first delivery was arriving with less speed than Eala was capable of producing. And perhaps most importantly, she noticed that a left-handed player with the ability to curve the ball away from a right-hander's backhand was too often serving into the wrong patterns. Her advice centered on changing the grip, creating more slice, and making far greater use of Eala's left-handed advantage. That may sound technical, it may sound like one small adjustment in a sport built on thousands of details. But in elite tennis, one adjustment can rewrite an entire career. Imagine Alex Eala beginning a service game at love all and immediately dragging a right-handed opponent off the court with a vicious left-handed slice. Now the return comes back shorter. Now Eala steps inside the baseline. Now the forehand is attacking instead of defending. Now the opponent is reacting rather than dictating. One better serve has changed 3 shots before the rally has even truly begun. That is why this matters so much. A bigger serve does not merely create more aces. It changes the architecture of the point. It changes where the returner stands. It changes how aggressively the returner can swing. It changes whether Eala begins the rally balanced or under pressure. And over the course of a long match, it changes how much physical energy she must spend protecting her own service games. Suddenly, holding serve is no longer an exhausting escape. It becomes expectation. Suddenly, every break of serve becomes more valuable because the opponent knows getting that break back may be far more difficult. Suddenly, the scoreboard begins carrying a different kind of pressure. And pressure is where careers are transformed. This is what makes Navratilova's observation so powerful. She knows better than almost anyone what a left-handed serve can do to the geometry of a tennis court. Her own career was built around relentless pressure, attacking instincts, precision, and the ability to force opponents into uncomfortable positions before they could establish their preferred patterns. So when a champion with that level of experience looks at Eala and identifies the serve, the tennis world should pay attention. Not because Eala must become Martina Navratilova. She does not. She must become the most complete version of Alex Eala, and that version may be far more dangerous than the one opponents have already faced. Consider what Eala has managed while the serve remains a developing weapon. At Wimbledon, Swiatek admitted that Eala's slower serving rhythm was surprisingly difficult to read, describing how unusual it felt compared with the deliveries she normally faces. In other words, even the current version of Eala's serve can create discomfort because it disrupts expectation. Now imagine keeping that unpredictability while adding greater speed. Imagine keeping the unusual rhythm while adding a vicious left-handed slice. Imagine an opponent preparing for 100 miles per hour and suddenly receiving a spinning serve pulling her outside the doubles alley. Then imagine the next point arriving directly into the body, then wide again, then down the center. That is not merely power, that is uncertainty. And uncertainty destroys confidence. The returner begins guessing, the feet hesitate. The preparation becomes late. The contact point becomes unstable. And suddenly Eala is no longer trying to survive her service games, she is controlling them. That would affect everything else she does. Her return game becomes even more dangerous because she can attack without feeling that every lost point on serve will become catastrophic. Her forehand becomes more dangerous because she receives more short balls. Her backhand becomes more dangerous because opponents are already stretched before the rally settles. Her drop shot becomes more dangerous because the opponent is standing farther behind the baseline. Her movement becomes more efficient because she does not have to defend neutral rallies immediately after every serve. This is why one technical improvement can create an avalanche. And there is another layer to this story. Alex Eala carries something almost no coach can manufacture. Belief, not fake belief, not social media confidence. Competitive belief, the kind that allows a young player to look across the net, see a Grand Slam champion, and refuse to behave as though she is supposed to lose. That quality was impossible to ignore during her Wimbledon run. She had already produced major upsets before arriving in London, but beating Swiatek on the grass once again showed that reputation alone does not intimidate her. The official WTA record of her 2026 Wimbledon campaign confirms just how significant that run became, with Eala reaching the fourth round after defeating Swiatek before falling to Paolini. So the question becomes terrifyingly simple for the rest of the tour. What happens when the fearless player starts getting free points? What happens when the return specialist becomes difficult to break? What happens when the woman who already enjoys long exchanges suddenly discovers a reliable way to shorten them? What happens when those exhausting three-set battles become straight-set victories because one service break is enough? That is the transformation Navratilova's observation points toward, not a cosmetic improvement. Not a few extra miles per hour, a completely different competitive equation. For years, tennis has taught the same brutal lesson. At the highest level, weaknesses are hunted, again and again. If a player struggles moving forward, opponents pull her toward the net. If a forehand collapses under pressure, every important rally finds that sigh. If a second serve sits up, returners step inside the baseline and attack without mercy. Nothing stays hidden. The deeper a player goes into major tournaments, the more ruthless the scouting becomes. And that is why Eala's next stage is so important. The surprise factor disappears. Opponents study the patterns, coaches build detailed plans. Video analysts search for habits. The player who was once the dangerous outsider becomes the player everyone wants to solve. And the only answer is evolution. That is where Navratilova's message becomes bigger than a technical critique. It becomes a roadmap. Use the left hand, change the geometry. Develop the grip, create the slice, raise the pace when the moment demands it. Make the opponent fear the first shot of the point before Eala even unleashes the weapons that come afterward. Because Alex Eala does not need to become someone else. She needs to make opponents deal with more of what she already is. A left-handed problem, a relentless competitor. A player carrying the hopes of millions of Filipino fans every time she walks onto a major court. And now, perhaps, a player standing one major technical evolution away from becoming dramatically more difficult to stop. Martina Navratilova did not describe some impossible transformation. She identified something far more exciting. A fix, a realistic one. A fix that can be trained. A fix that can be repeated. A fix that can turn defensive service games into attacking opportunities. And if Alex Eala truly unlocks it, then every opponent who has already struggled against her may soon discover that the version they faced before was only the beginning. Because the most frightening Alex Eala may not be the one who shocked champions while fighting around a vulnerable serve. The most frightening Alex Eala may be the one who comes next, the one who walks to the baseline, bounces the ball, looks across the net, and suddenly owns a delivery worthy of everything else in her game. And once that version arrives, the entire balance of power could begin to shift. Martina Navratilova reveals the one fix that could transform Alex Eala's career. And that is where this story becomes even more dangerous for everyone standing on the other side of the net. Because improvement at this level does not happen in isolation. When the serve becomes stronger, confidence grows with it. When confidence grows, decision-making becomes cleaner. When decision-making becomes cleaner, Pressure begins to move away from Eala and onto the opponent. That transformation can happen almost invisibly at first. One extra service hold, one returner forced several feet farther behind the baseline, one short reply attacked immediately, 1 second serve struck with enough spin and conviction that an opponent can no longer step forward and punish it. Those moments may look small on a statistics sheet, but inside a match they can become enormous. Imagine Eala serving late in a deciding set. The stadium is roaring. Filipino flags are shaking in every corner of the arena. The opponent knows that one break could decide everything. In the past, that might have been the moment when the returner moved forward, sensing an opportunity. But now Eala sends a slicing left-handed serve swinging away from the returner. The ball curves, the opponent stretches. The return floats short. Eala steps inside the court and crushes the next shot. 15-love. The next serve attacks the body. 30-love. Then comes the wide serve again. 40-love. Suddenly a game that might once have required 10 exhausting rallies is over almost before the crowd has finished celebrating the first point. That changes a player. And it changes everyone watching her. The opponent begins looking toward the coaching box. The return position shifts farther back. The confidence to attack disappears. And Eala starts walking between points with the body language of someone who knows that her service games belong to her. That is what the elite possess. Not simply weapons, ownership. The best players in the world do not walk to the baseline hoping their serve survives. They walk there expecting to control the next minute of the match. That mentality is built through repetition. Thousands of serves on practice courts when the stadium is empty. Thousands of adjustments to the toss, the grip, the shoulder rotation, the contact point and the direction. A few inches higher, a fraction more spin. A slightly different angle, again, until the movement stops feeling technical and becomes instinct. That is the hidden reality behind every great weapon tennis has ever seen. Fans remember the ace on championship point. They do not see the lonely afternoon months earlier when that exact serve was struck hundreds of times with nobody applauding. And that may be where the next version of Alex Eala is being created. Away from the nose, away from the headlines. Away from the unbelievable victories and the viral reactions. On the practice court, because once the tennis world begins studying you, talent is no longer enough. Evolution becomes survival. Every scouting team will search for patterns. Where does Eala serve under pressure? What happens when she misses the first delivery? Does the second serve sit inside the strike zone? Does she prefer one direction on break point? Can an aggressive returner rush her? Can an opponent attack early and prevent her from establishing the baseline exchanges she loves? Those questions are being asked. That is what happens when a player becomes important. Nobody spends hours building detailed tactical plans for someone they do not fear. The attention itself is proof that Eala has entered a different world. And now she must answer that attention with another layer. Navratilova's observation points directly toward that layer. A left-handed player owns natural possibilities that right-handed opponents cannot perfectly reproduce in practice. The spin arrives differently. The ball moves across the returner's body differently. The wide serve from the advantage court can pull a right-handed opponent into uncomfortable territory. And when that angle begins working, the entire service box feels wider. Now the returner must protect the outside. That creates space through the middle. Now the body serve becomes more effective because the opponent is leaning toward the expected wide ball. Then the pattern changes again. This is tennis chess played at full speed. And Eala already possesses one of the most important qualities required to use those patterns. Courage. She does not play as though the famous name across the net deserves special treatment. That matters. Because developing a stronger serve is not simply mechanical. Eventually, the player must trust it when the score becomes terrifying. Anyone can swing freely at 40-love. Champions must swing freely at 30-40. That is where technical improvement becomes competitive identity. Can Eala choose the aggressive target when one mistake could cost the set? Can she trust the slice when thousands of people are screaming? Can she commit to the new motion when old habits are begging her to play safe? Those are the moments that determine whether a weapon truly exists. And if the answer becomes yes, the consequences could stretch far beyond one tournament. Think about the Grand Slams, 7 matches. 2 weeks, pressure increasing round after round. Physical demands building every day. Every minute saved matters, every easy service game matters. Every point won without a brutal rally matters. A player who constantly fights through long service games can survive for a few rounds. But winning a major requires something more. Efficiency. The ability to protect the body. The ability to escape dangerous moments quickly. The ability to create free points when the legs are tired and the nerves are screaming. That is why the serve could become so important to Eala's future. She does not need to lead the tour in aces. She does not need to suddenly become the hardest server in women's tennis. She needs enough threat that opponents cannot attack without fear, enough variation that they cannot guess, enough spin that the left-handed angle becomes a genuine tactical weapon, enough confidence that the second serve is not an invitation that alone could reshape entire matches. And imagine what happens to the ranking when those close matches begin turning. A few extra holds across a season. A few more quarterfinals becoming semifinals, a few semifinals becoming finals. A few early round battles ending without the drama of a deciding set. Rankings are built from moments exactly like those, not one magical night. Not one upset, consistency, week after week. City after city, surface after surface, that is the bridge separating the dangerous outsider from the permanent member of the elite. Eala has already shown she can create the unforgettable moment. The next challenge is creating the unforgettable season. And that requires becoming difficult to defeat even on days when everything else is not perfect. The forehand will occasionally misfire. The return timing will occasionally disappear. The legs will occasionally feel heavy. The conditions will sometimes be terrible: wind, heat, cold, slow courts, fast courts. No player controls all of it, but a reliable serve can become a sanctuary. A place to return when chaos takes over. One routine, one toss, one motion, one target. That psychological security is priceless. And for Eala, there is another force surrounding all of this. The Philippines, every breakthrough seems to travel thousands of miles almost instantly. Every victory becomes a national conversation. Every stadium with a Filipino community can suddenly sound like home. That support is extraordinary, but support also creates expectation. People begin dreaming bigger, a deeper Grand Slam run, a trophy. A place among the very best, perhaps eventually something Filipino tennis has spent generations waiting to witness. Eala cannot control those dreams. But she can control the work, and somewhere inside that work is the exact improvement Navratilova identified. That is why the comment matters. It came from someone who understands the difference between being talented enough to threaten champions and being complete enough to dominate them. There is no guarantee. Tennis never gives guarantees. A technical adjustment can take months, sometimes longer. Changing a serve under the pressure of professional competition can be brutally difficult because the player must keep competing while rebuilding the weapon. There can be double faults. There can be awkward matches. There can be moments when the old motion feels safer. But the reward can be enormous. Because Eala does not need perfection, she needs progress. A little more speed, a little more bite, a little more disguise. A little more conviction. Stack those improvements together and suddenly, the difference is not little anymore. Suddenly the player who was already breaking down champions from the baseline is beginning points with an advantage. Suddenly, the opponent is no longer asking how to attack Eala's serve. She is asking how to survive it without giving Eala the first strike. That is a completely different question. And once opponents start asking different questions, the entire career begins moving into different territory. The most exciting part is that Eala's story still feels unfinished. There is still so much tennis ahead. So many courts she has not conquered. So many rivalries waiting to develop. So many moments that will test whether this rise becomes a brilliant chapter or the beginning of something far larger. And somewhere in those future matches, perhaps on a packed center court with everything on the line, we may see the exact moment this warning became prophecy. A left-handed serve swinging viciously away, a helpless return. A clean winner, a fist raised toward thousands of roaring Filipino supporters. And somewhere watching, Martina Navratilova may recognize the adjustment immediately. Because she saw the possibility before everyone else could see the finished product. The serve was not merely a weakness to high, it was unused territory. A weapon waiting to be built, and if Alex Eala builds it, the tennis world may discover that all those stunning victories, all those shattered expectations, all those nights when established champions suddenly found themselves trapped inside her fearless game were not the peak of the story, they were the warning. Martina Navratilova reveals the one fix that could transform Alex Eala's career. And warnings have a strange way of becoming invitations. For Alex Eala, this one is an invitation to imagine what happens when a part of her game opponents currently believe they can pressure becomes the part they begin fearing most. That is the real transformation, not simply hitting the ball harder. Not chasing spectacular speed for the sake of a number. Not trying to turn every first serve into an ace. The transformation is making the returner uncomfortable before the rally even begins. That discomfort spreads quickly. A returner who does not know whether the ball is moving wide, jamming the body, or attacking the center begins reacting instead of anticipating. The split step becomes less aggressive, the first movement becomes uncertain. The return lands shorter, and suddenly Eala is moving forward rather than scrambling backward. That difference can decide matches. Because Eala's greatest strength has never been built around waiting for somebody else to give her permission to attack. She wants to impose herself, she wants to take the ball early. She wants to redirect pace and turn defense into offense before the opponent realizes the rally has changed. A more threatening serve would feed directly into that identity. It would allow her to play more points on her own terms. And at the highest level, playing on your own terms is everything. The elite do not simply win more points, they force opponents into the kinds of points they prefer. They create patterns, they repeat those patterns until the player across the net begins feeling trapped. That is what a refined left-handed serve could give Eala. A pattern she owns, a pattern opponents know is coming and still struggle to stop. That is when a shot becomes truly powerful. When everybody has seen it, everybody has studied it. Everybody has prepared for it. And it keeps working anyway. The history of tennis is filled with champions who possessed exactly that kind of signature weapon. Opponents understood the pattern. They knew the danger. They spent entire practice sessions preparing for it. Then the match began, the pressure arrived, and preparation was no longer enough. That is the level Eala is chasing, not surprise, reliability. Not one magical serving day. A weapon that travels with her from tournament to tournament, hard court to clay. Clay to grass, small stadium to Grand Slam center court. That consistency could be the difference between a player everyone loves watching and a player everyone fears facing. And there is a massive difference between those two things. Exciting players produce highlights, champions produce inevitability. The crowd begins expecting them to escape, opponents begin fearing that one missed opportunity will be punished. A break point disappears and suddenly the entire match feels different. A chance at love 30 vanishes after two fearless serves and the frustration begins building. Those emotional swings matter. Professional tennis is not played by machines. It is played by human beings carrying doubt, fatigue, memory and fear onto the court. Every time Eala saves herself with the serve, she places another small weight onto the opponent's mind. Every time she holds quickly after a difficult return game, she denies the opponent time to recover emotionally. Every time she creates a free point at a critical moment, she changes the story unfolding inside both players' heads. That psychological advantage cannot be measured by speed alone. And perhaps that is why Navratilova's observation deserves so much attention. She was not simply talking about technique, she was talking about leverage. Where can Alex Eala make one improvement that strengthens everything around it? The serve is the answer. Improve the serve and the first forehand becomes easier. Improve the serve and the service games become shorter. Improve the serve and the legs remain fresher. Improve the serve and the return games can be played with greater freedom. Improve the serve and a single break of the opponent can suddenly feel enormous. One fix, multiple consequences, that is how careers change. Not always through dramatic reinvention, sometimes through one improvement repeated thousands of times until the entire competitive identity begins looking different. And Eala has already experienced how quickly perceptions can shift. There was a time when she walked into major matches as the young player with nothing to lose. Then the victories started coming, big names fell. Crowds grew, expectations exploded, the tennis world began recognizing the name before the match rather than afterward. That changes the pressure. Now there are opponents who will celebrate beating Alex Eala. Now there are younger players who will study her. Now there are fans arriving at tournaments specifically to see her. Now there are headlines before the first ball has even been struck. That is what growth looks like. And the next phase is even harder. Because climbing toward the elite is one challenge, staying there is another. The players who survive at the top are constantly rebuilding themselves. They add new patterns, they strengthen vulnerable areas. They adjust when opponents adjust. They refuse to let yesterday's version become tomorrow's limitation. That is what Eala must do. And if she embraces that process, the ceiling remains difficult to define. Her left-handed game already gives her something different. Her ability to fight through uncomfortable moments gives her something priceless. Her experience against major champions gives her evidence that she belongs. Her connection with Filipino supporters gives her an emotional force that follows her across continents. Now comes the technical evolution. The detail that could connect all those strengths. Picture the future, a Grand Slam night session. The match has entered a deciding set. Neither player has broken, the scoreboard is tight. The crowd understands that every point has become dangerous, Eala steps to the baseline. Months or years earlier, the opponent might have moved forward, looking to attack. Not anymore. Now she hesitates. She remembers the wide slice. She remembers the serve into the body. She remembers the delivery through the center. She does not know which one is coming. Eala tosses the ball. The motion flows. The serve bends away. The returner stretches and barely makes contact. The reply sits up. One strike later, the point is finished. The crowd erupts. That is not fantasy built on nothing. That is the logical destination of the exact improvement Navratilova identified. And the beauty of it is that Eala does not need to lose the qualities that made her dangerous in the first place. She does not need to abandon the grinding rallies. She does not need to stop using her speed. She does not need to become reckless. She simply needs another door into the point, another way to win. Another weapon opponents must respect. Champions become terrifying when they can beat you in more than one way. If the rally becomes physical, they survive. If the match becomes tactical, they adapt. If the points become short, they strike. If the pressure becomes enormous, they trust the patterns they have built. That completeness is what separates the very good from the unforgettable. And Alex Eala is still building toward it. That should be the most frightening thought for her rivals. She is not a finished player. The story is still being written. Every weakness identified today can become a weapon tomorrow. Every difficult loss can become information. Every match against the best players in the world can reveal another detail that needs refinement. And when someone like Martina Navratilova speaks, the smartest response is not defensiveness. It is curiosity. What did she see? Why did she see it? How can that information be used? That is how greatness grows. Champions listen without surrendering their identity. They absorb knowledge without becoming copies. They take one observation and turn it into thousands of hours of deliberate improvement. Then one day the world notices the result and calls it sudden. But nothing about it was sudden. The work happened quietly. The transformation was happening long before the trophies arrived. That may be the chapter Alex Eala is entering now. The quieter chapter behind the headlines, the repetition, the refinement, the frustrating sessions, and the serve does not behave. The adjustments to the grip, the search for heavier slice, the commitment to using the advantage of the left hand more aggressively, the courage to try those changes under real match pressure. Those moments will never generate the same nose as defeating a champion. But they may matter even more, because they determine how many champions she can defeat next. And if that serve evolves, the rest of the tour will have to evolve with it. Returners will stand farther back, coaches will design new patterns. Opponents will search for different answers. That is the greatest compliment any athlete can receive. When the sport begins changing its plans because of you. Alex Eala has already forced people to notice. The next goal is forcing them to adjust, then forcing them to doubt, then forcing them to accept that the young Filipino they once viewed as an exciting outsider has become something far more permanent, a contender, a threat. A name that changes tournament draws, a player nobody wants to see waiting on the other side of the net. And perhaps years from now, when people search for the moment that helped trigger the next stage of her career, they will remember this simple observation. One legendary champion saw one opening, one technical weakness, one enormous possibility. The serve, the shot that begins every service point. The shot that could change everything that follows. Because Alex Eala already knows how to fight when a rally begins. She already knows how to make champions uncomfortable. She already knows how to carry the pressure of a nation without surrendering her competitive fire. Now imagine what happens when she begins those rallies from a position of authority. Imagine the left-handed slice pulling opponents beyond the sideline. Imagine the first strike landing into open space. Imagine the short service games. Imagine the confidence. Imagine the pressure transferring across the net. Imagine the biggest stages becoming places where opponents, not Eala, begin wondering how they are supposed to survive. That is the possibility Martina Navratilova placed in front of the tennis world. And it is why this story is far bigger than criticism. It is about potential. It is about evolution. It is about the terrifying possibility that the Alex Eala who has already shaken women's tennis is still only an early version of the player she can become. The champions she has challenged have seen the fire. The crowds have felt the belief. The Philippines has embraced the journey. And now the next weapon is waiting. If Alex Eala unlocks it, there may come a day when nobody asks whether she can compete with the elite anymore. They will ask whether the elite can stop her. And by then, the answer may already be arriving from the other side of the net, spinning viciously through the air from the left hand of a player who took one legendary piece of advice and turned it into the weapon that changed her career forever.